Hello mortals, I am the BookTube Goddess, the #1 drag queen booktuber on YouTube. And I got tagged by Eric from Break Even Books to do the anti-TBR tag. Well, let's get into it. Tag 1, a popular book everyone loves that you have no interest in reading. Well, how about The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid? Now, booktubers have raved about this since I've been watching BookTube, and the concept seems kind of interesting. An aging actress recounting her life and 7 husbands, which sounds to me a bit like Elizabeth Taylor. Maybe it's a little bit of All About Eve, one of my favorite movies, but strangely, I have no desire to read this book, probably because it's not a fantasy or science fiction, or is it? Let me know in the comments. Now, if this was more of a comedy, like an Auntie Mame story, I would probably be more intrigued, but I don't think it is. Anyway, maybe someone can convince me to read it. Go ahead, let me know in the comments. But all I know is every time I think about getting it, I find another book that I want to read more. So, next prompt. A classic book or author you don't have an interest in reading. Well, I have no desire to read Proust. Now, Proust was that French author who was gay and closeted. Remember, this is the turn of the century, of last century. But he wrote the magnum opus Remembrance of Things Past, which is a 7-volume novel. I guess that's really nothing compared to some of the fantasy series I've read, but I know Proust is considered one of the most influential writers of the 20th century. My uncle was a big Proust fan, and so I've been intrigued, but boy, I don't want to read it. I think I heard that Joan Rivers even wrote her senior thesis in college on Proust, but the things I've heard about it is that it's extremely dense, and he writes like pages describing a bowl of fruit or a chair or something like that. He's one of those authors I'm curious about, but not enough to actually pick up and read. Next prompt, an author whose books you have no interest in reading, or a problematic author whose books you have no interest in reading. And you can combine these parts A and B of this question. Okay, so anyway, I'm just going to have one answer for this one, and that is Orson Scott Card. I was a big fan of his. I think Ender's Game is one of the great science fiction books, and I even liked his Alvin Maker fantasy series. But his campaign against gay rights really made me stop reading him. Now note, I didn't say his views on gays. I said his campaign against gay rights. I don't really care so much if a writer thinks homosexuality is a sin, as long as it doesn't creep into his or her books. And if it does, it would make me not read them, but this is kind of different. Orson Scott Card was on the board of directors of NOM, the National Organization for Marriage, whose sole purpose was to keep marriage between a man and a woman, and he wrote some really vicious things about gays which came to light, including arguing that homosexuality itself should be illegal for the good of society, and let that one sink in. He wasn't just arguing about gay marriage, he was arguing that gays should be jailed or fined or something. I don't know, but after learning that, I just could not bring myself to read any more of his books, and that's just how it goes. Next prompt. An author you have read a couple of books from and have decided their books are not for you. Are you kidding me? Stephanie Myers. I read Twilight and Midnight Sun recently, and I really did not like them. So I can't see myself reading any more books by Stephanie Myers. Sue me. Next prompt. A genre you have no interest in, or a genre you've tried to get into and couldn't. Now, I hate answering this because I give the same answer each time, but it is romance. And after reading enough romance books, including Twilight, by the way, I've come to the conclusion that I just don't see or understand the romance plot. I get totally bored reading romance because it feels like, for long stretches of the book, that nothing is happening. But when people rave about a romance book and I read it, like Red, White, and Royal Blue, I'm just stupefied trying to figure out what the appeal is. And I've come to the conclusion that there are plot points in romance books that just don't register to me as plot points. Maybe because the plot movements only involve subtle shifts in a relationship or change in someone's feelings or whatever, but it just doesn't read as moving the story forward for me. Now, that's not to say that I don't appreciate romance subplots, which is found in all genres, like the Daevabad series. The romance subplot is pretty important, but there's also a main plot that I can see that moves the story along and fires up the pacing and brings about some action. And I've heard some people argue about romance fantasies like Court of Thorn and Roses, which I have read and I didn't hate, but I guess maybe the subplot was strong enough that it moved the story forward. Whatever the case, romance, at least strict romance, isn't for me. Next prompt, a book you have bought but will never read. Okay, I almost never not read a book that I've bought, especially because I'm a consecutive book purchaser, meaning I don't purchase a new book until I've read the last one, which probably makes me in the minority among booktubers who seem to have bookshelves of TBR books. But even though I usually only read ebooks, I looked through my bookshelves and found a book that I haven't read and probably will never read, and that is this, Conan the Invincible by Robert Jordan. I know I got this at a used bookstore only because Robert Jordan wrote it and I'm a big Game of Thrones fan, but I'm not a huge fan of Conan. I've seen the movies and I've read a couple of Conan comic books that a roommate in college had, so yeah, I don't think I'm ever going to read this one. Next prompt, a series you have no interest in reading or a series you started and DNF. Oh boy, do I have a series. I stopped reading the Malazan series by Steven Erikson. I really enjoyed like the first 4 or 5 books in the series, and I was a big fan. I thought it was one of the most imaginative high fantasy series I've ever read, and the world building was so detailed and amazing that I was convinced this would be the next Game of Thrones or Wheel of Time. But then I believe it was the book The Bone Hunters that broke me. It broke me. Every book in this series seems to get more and more dense. I don't know how else to describe it, but by the time I got to The Bone Hunters, the writing was just so dense and slow that I just could not continue. Now, I looked up the series on Wikipedia, and the books, except for a couple of the books, all break 1,000 pages, and the later books are all over 1,200 pages, so yeah, it's a big slog. And this actually makes me kind of sad, because I still think the story is amazing, but I just couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take it. And I haven't tried to pick up the series again, so... Now, if you've kept up with the Malazan series, let me know in the comments what keeps you reading. Or maybe you completely disagree with me and you have no problem with his writing. But for me, couldn't do it. Next prompt, a new release you have no interest in reading. Well, I mentioned this in my last Shelve It or Shove It, but Ready Player 2 by Ernest Cline, because I could not get into Ready Player One. And full disclosure, I listened to the audiobook of Ready Player One, and I have a feeling it was the voice actor that kind of ruined it for me. It was narrated by Will Wheaton, and this makes sense on the surface because the book draws heavily on the 80s, and Will Wheaton played Wesley Crusher in Star Trek The Next Generation, which was a huge deal at the time in the 80s. The original Star Trek had been off the air for 20 years, unless you count the animated Saturday morning cartoons. But anyway, it was a big deal when The Next Generation came on. Now, I eventually came to like Will Wheaton in the Next Generation Star Trek series. I didn't like him when he first came on, but I don't know if he is an experienced voice actor. At least not like some of the audiobook narrators I've come to love. So it wasn't a great experience, and honestly, I don't even remember that much about Ready Player One because I kept falling asleep listening to it. So yeah, it's kind of a bummer. I may reread Ready Player One at some point in a different medium, but can't do Ready Player Two. So that's all the prompts. This is a fast tag video. Please like this video and subscribe if you haven't subscribed to this channel already. And I guess I'll tag Jesse from Bowties and Books. Here's hoping. And I'll tag Amanda, who is my team leader for the Reindeer Readathon.
Go Candy Kings!
And finally, I guess I'll tag Connor Stampinator. That's all I have today. Thank you for watching, and until next time, may all the books you read be blessed.